All right. Lewis and Kyle, thank you for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Of
Absolutely. Super
course.
excited to be here.
Hell yeah. So I figured we'd start it off with the story of how you guys met. I feel like that's a great place to jump things off. Who
Yeah,
wants to
Kyle, you want
take
to
that one?
jump right into it?
Sure. So actually, it starts for me at a basketball game that I didn't want to go to. So Alabama is we both go to the University of Alabama. We're a big football school. We've always been really good at football, not so much basketball until here recently. But my freshman year of college, one of my buddies was like, "Do you want to go to this basketball game?" And I was like, "Not really," but I went anyways. And on every chair at like the stadium, there was these newspapers that had been printed off, and on the back of one was an advertisement for the Edge Entrepreneurship Center, which was like this brand new $11 million facility that I'd never heard about that was dedicated entirely to the support of student entrepreneurs. And I hadn't started any businesses, but my dad's always been an entrepreneur. I've always been interested in the idea of business, constantly reading different things. So I was like, I need to go check this out. So the next day, I drove over there and met with a guy named Josh Sahib, and he told me about something called Startup Weekend, which was March 3rd, like a couple weeks later. I signed up with him right there, and again, right before Startup Weekend, I was like, I don't really want to do this. Like, it's uncomfortable. You're supposed to seek discomfort, but it's like finding a million reasons why I shouldn't do it right before. But I went, I did it. I walked in, I saw Lewis. I sat down and explained my business idea to him, and he was like, I think that's not a great idea. And then I'll let Lewis tell the rest of this story.
I'm not sure what pieces are missing there, but we competed against each other at Startup Weekend. For people who aren't familiar with the format of the event, it's like a weekend long. You come up with the business idea and do all you can to take it to reality within the confines of that weekend, and then do a whole presentation of it at the end of the weekend. Kyle, believe it or not, as a podcaster, his idea, not a podcaster at the time, was an app for facilitating deep conversations, and through like provoking people to think about thoughtful questions in a group of people. Mine was for a e-commerce website solely based on SEO, just like I called it Fat Tails. It was like this ideas for SEO based on long tail keywords. We competed against each other. Kyle ended up winning, but then I took some place that was less than Kyle's place, which is all that matters for the story. And then Kyle asked me to hang out later on that week, and we got burritos. And over dinner, Kyle told me, I guess I was so obnoxious in the first 4 minutes of our conversation, that he would never want to work with me. Never explained why. He just said, I can never see us working well together. And I probably deserved it. I probably said some stuff that provoked him. But then we ended up working together on a bunch of different projects. We did a summer academy through that same facility where we worked on an e-commerce website now defunct called theproductivitystore.com. And then Kyle joined
If
a
anybody's in the
fraternity.
market for a domain, reach out to us.
Yeah, I think we still own it, theproductivitystore.com. But after that summer, I went to Thailand for 4 months, and Kyle pledged a fraternity. So it's kind of really difficult, and there wasn't any traction to like keep alive anyway, despite the great domain name. And then we reconvened spring of 2020 back at Alabama. Kind of felt bad about killing our last idea for no good reason besides inconvenient timing. And we're scheming different ways to get started. And then the podcast was born out of that. I don't know if we could keep the story going, but you might have more questions from there.
What happened with you reading the 4 Hour Work Week?
Oh yeah. So when we went and got burritos, I had read the 4 Hour Work Week and dove very deep into the Tim Ferriss rabbit hole years before. I'd been a big fan for a long time. I could go back to like 2016 Fly Bullet Fridays in my email archives. But so I walked into Moe's, which is where we got burritos together, and he was sitting there reading the 4 Hour Work Week with his like back turned, or I don't know. He like didn't see me, and he was just like face deep in the 4 Hour Work Week. And in my head, that mental image has been burned into it because it's just such a Lewis picture to paint.
Gotcha. And so now, how did the podcast come to be? You guys have been friends, you were enemies, then friends. And so where does the podcast come into the whole equation?
Well, to be clear, we were never enemies. I said that I didn't want to work with him only because I thought that we would be good to be like advisors to each other. And at that point, I thought that we were going to continue working on the ideas that we had been working on at Startup Weekend. So
My
I was
idea
like,
wasn't that good.
we should stick together. I don't know. But we were never enemies. What was the question again? We went from enemies to
starting the
friends and then the
podcast,
podcast.
how and
Right. So I basically got a few friends together to have like a reoccurring lunch where we talked about, I don't know, I guess like deep stuff. I just like to talk about like the world and like politics and have an open floor to discuss things like this. Through that, we started to invite people to come. We had one with a rabbi. We had one with Buddy, who I'm working with today, and they were great. They were really fantastic, like venues for conversation. But after we were done with it, they were over and gone, and there was no semblance of it left. So we had started doing that a couple times, a month. And then COVID hit, and we were like, well, we can't do that anymore. How could we still do that and record it? Because that was something that we hadn't had. And then, from there, it's a pretty clear picture of your options. It's like, well, you could start a podcast. And we had a lot of free time. We assumed that, people in quarantine would be more willing to talk to people on a podcast because everybody was sitting at home. And yeah, that's kind of the origin story. I don't know if Lewis has anything more to add there.
So talk about some of the learnings that have taken place over the last year. It's been a huge journey, and I'm sure there's a lot to touch on, but what is something that surprised you about the entire journey?
I think one thing that was surprising is essentially like how just the willingness of people to say yes to the podcast. Like we started it, it's kind of like it was an overkill solution to the problem we were having. Like one problem we were having specifically was just like specific internet entrepreneurs or authors. We read their book, read their blog, used their product, and wanted to just like be their friend and talk to them and ask for advice. And we're not getting past, like we're just getting ignored essentially. And for good reason. Like these people are busy, and we couldn't empathize with that because we were kind of naive and like younger, and we still are young and still are naive, but even more so than we are now, much more so. And so we're like, how can we ever get past this like wall of being ignored? And then it was like 5 episodes. Like we stayed in our personal networks for the first like 10 episodes, partly for like lack of self-confidence, lack of, we wanted to like make sure we were decent at like the tech setup, for example. We didn't want to like have all these mishaps and have been using someone's attention and like waste their time. But once we got past that, literally 2 to 3 weeks in, the doors have just kind of been, the floodgates have been open. I say we don't have like an extremely high yes conversion for any specific person, but if you gave us like a certain caliber of person, so it's like if you gave us a list of 100 names, and it's like I couldn't guarantee that we could get Mark Cuban on tomorrow, but someone at Mark Cuban's level, based on timing and persistence, like I'd be very confident we could get someone on that level.
When you say yes percentage, what does that mean exactly?
I send myself and Kyle so many outbound requests to do interviews, just like, hey, I love what you do. Usually something hopefully more specific than, yeah, hey, I love what you do, but something along those lines. Would love to interview for my podcast, and then a couple of other things in that message that communicate that we're legit and like we're not just in day 1, week 1 of doing it. The yes percentage is the percentage of those that come back as yes relative to the total amount I send. I don't actually keep track of it. I couldn't tell you the number. Maybe intuitively it's like 30%. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds right. What advice would you give to someone who's sending cold outreach? Because that's not just specific to podcasting. Anyone is going to have to send a cold email sometime in their life. So what would you give advice for that person?
I think one thing I would recommend, and this is something Kyle brought up to me a week ago, is essentially as many times as you use I is an indicator that your message is bad. So the fewest amount of times you can make it about you as possible, great. This is also a pretty generic piece of advice, but you always want to lead with value. Like you don't want to make it something where they would just say, oh, sure. Like you want to structure it where the offer you're making is something they'd want to say like a resounding, enthusiastic yes to, not just like, okay, sure. And that's accomplished. I'm sure someone's brought this up on your show before, but like the copywriting framework of AIDA, AIDA, is something I follow pretty religiously. It's a pretty well received, easily digestible template for like the human brain understanding an offer and like being captivated to respond to it positively. So the A, you want to catch their attention both in the subject line and the first sentence, and then some line, 1 to 2 sentences to make them interested, some reason to make them want to do it. So that could be like your social proof element or some testimonial, desire. And then the call to action, hyper specific, not just like, if you're in, let me know and we'll do it. Just like, if this is something like a super specific, tiny thing, like you're not asking them to say yes to the hour. You're like, if you're interested in learning more, right? Like, or if this is something you'd consider doing, let me know and I'll provide the details. So you're not asking for like the big thing right off the bat. You're asking for something small and then like proceeding step by step to get them to agree to like the larger ask. That's kind of our framework, assuming it's cold.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then if it's warm, how does that differ?
If it's warm, it's usually pretty easy. If it's like, so for example, you introduced us to Dickie Bush when we interviewed him on our show. So we asked you like, what your relationship with him was, and if you're comfortable introducing us to him. And if it's something that they are comfortable with, there's like, yeah, of course. And like before you even ask them to do it, they already set you up,
Mm-hmm.
And then if they're like, yeah, I don't know, but like I would recommend, he's really busy, but he processes all of his podcast requests through his agent, and I'm willing to give you her email address, and then you can say, just mention that I introduced you, and like that increases your likelihood. But otherwise, that's just cold, with like the desire being the fact that you're friends with their friends.
Have you guys had any moments throughout the process where you've just been like, how is this happening right now?
I would say no. I mean, interviewing, it's been a constant sort of like snowball rolling down, and at every point, and this is something that Lewis wrote about actually when he was writing about our podcast and what we've done, is that it'll take really many years to internalize the value that we're getting from doing the podcast. I would say that, there are a lot of moments where people will say yes to coming on the podcast and we'll get really excited. But I wouldn't say that any moment was like, this is unbelievable. Like, I can't believe that we're at where we're at. I think that we'll probably look back and be like, wow, I can't believe that we did that.
Because you FaceTimed me a couple of weeks ago, and the impression that I got was like, you were saying, how is this happening right now? Was that incorrect on my part?
Well, it wasn't like, when I FaceTimed you, I was saying like, just how incredible it is that the three of us could reach out to anyone potentially and like have, a relatively higher chance of speaking to them than most other people. And that is unbelievable, and that is like super, super exciting for the future. Not that, the act like, so I guess that maybe that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what's been something that you wish you would have done differently over the year of podcasting?
I really think, go for it.
You go for it.
No, I was kind of formulating it as I was talking.
Yeah,
I'm being
me too.
totally honest.
I mean, I wish that we had figured our microphone and like the lighting out earlier. I mean, I don't think that really, I think, the something that I've been living by like in my head recently is something by Jack Butcher, which is constant imperfect action. And it's like, as we move through things, like iteratively we'll get better and better, and there will always be things that that we're leaving on the table in terms of improvements. Like right now I'll probably be like, why did my mic look like this, or why did, you know what I'm saying? So nothing specifically that I would do differently. I mean, I think that we have talked about before how we could have reached out to bigger names earlier, how we could have been sending out more correspondence, like at a higher volume and like higher acceleration toward more bigger names, and that might be that would be a piece of advice that I would give to somebody that's starting out, is just to like send it all the time hard.
Yeah. Anything to add, Lewis?
Yeah, I'd say one thing for me, it's less so things about the podcast, but more so like my life broader. just in the same time period of running the podcast. So one thing that just generally, you're working with a partner on a project that requires almost daily back and forth on like some topics. So like you want to be very, very aligned with the person you're working with as far as like how you like working together and if they're doing something that bothers you. And I think my personality, for whatever reason, is just to not bring things up right away. And like that are like, because they're small things, then eventually like, they stay small for a long time, they accumulate, and then it feels like a massive thing, and then it creates tension. So I think I'm not as good as I could be about like, as soon as something is bothering me, like saying something about it to Kyle. And one example of how that played out early on is I just felt this like weird stress since I've been the one that like does our editing, for example, and like I'm the one that kind of uploads the episode that like gets on the internet and like whatever. I feel this like weird pressure to like need to be home, and like I stress about basically maintaining consistency, and did not. So I felt like I had to be home for the one time that Kyle was able to record the introduction, so that we could edit it and put it out and publish it on time. And like I think that in combination with like stress on like schoolwork and things like that just like kept me inside my house more than it needed to. And once we brought that up, like once I eventually brought that up, like we made a system to handle it more better, and like I didn't feel that same way, and like I went out and started having fun again. But just like that stress of falling behind the deadline because I needed to coordinate someone else's time, which I don't want to micromanage Kyle. Like we're on the same playing field. Like I don't have that authority to do that. But not having those systems in place for like managing interpersonal different preferences for doing work led to me like not having as much fun as I could have just like in the rest of my life, and that completely my own fault for not bringing it up and like discussing what was bothering me. So like that's a very important thing for like making a healthier working relationship with someone you're always going back and forth with.
How did you find awareness of that, your own issue there?
I'm trying to think, like I'm probably going to be like making up a story that doesn't exist. But
I think it's just a theme that you have. I mean, it just like Lewis, it takes him, something he says is it takes him 7 times for you to explain something to him, and on the 7th time he's like, that's when it'll click. And I think that like that's the same for things that are bothering him. Like on the 7th time is when he'll be like, oh, that's actually been bothering me like for months. You know what I mean?
Is that accurate?
I think probably, like, so I have a very consistent journaling habit, and sometimes it's the 7th time I've brought it up to myself, and it's like, okay, now it's time to do something about it. And it's not like each of those 7 times I'm articulating the problem clearly. It might be it takes 7 times to actually clearly articulate what is the root of the problem, and then once you see it clearly, then it's like, okay, let's bring it up.
What does that yeah, go for it.
I was just gonna say, we have Kyle and I have some sort of like semi-occurring, like let's just resolve anything type relationship, like every month or two, or especially on like the academic schedule, like at the end of every semester we kind of reassess everything just kind of informally together. And so like sometimes just literally getting to that point in time, or like Thanksgiving break, and then we have one of those conversations about everything, and like we kind of just batch dealing with those things. But ideally we do that throughout the process. But were you gonna ask about something else?
Journaling. Yeah, journaling. I'm curious what that journaling practice looks like since you've been doing it for so long.
So I've consistently had an inconsistent habit in the sense that I always journal in some respect, and kind of always journal throughout the entire day. If that makes sense. Like I'm leaving notes to myself in class on like the margins of my notebook, just about what's distracting me, because I never pay attention. But I have that, and then I kind of alternate maybe cyclically between doing just the long form pen and paper, always like some sort of gratitude practice in there, some reminder of like something I read that's important to me. And then sometimes I'll do like a Notion type system with like a whole template, and there's like a series of 10 questions, and you go through that. And I kind of alternate those systems, but I'd say, 4 out of 7 days a week for 3 years, I've done one of those things.
Kyle, do you have any journaling practice yourself?
Yeah, I was thinking, I figured you're going to ask me that question. I'm much less rigorous about it. I would say that I'm like constantly thinking about the things that I'm interested in, and I will like have like things float to the top of my mind, and then as soon as it does, I like to write down the idea. So like I have a lot of like short 1-sentence like text messages that I'll send to either myself or I just write down in my notes. Like I send them to Lewis all the time, and I'm like, I don't want you to respond to this. I just like am leaving a note to myself and don't want to forget it. So I would say that is sort of my journaling practice. But I've been writing. I've been doing Ship 30 for 30 with Dick. Shout out Dickie. Shout out Cole. And it's been a really good habit to have had the last week. I guess it's not a habit yet, but and I've really been enjoying that. And I've been using Obsidian as a way to take notes. So I would say like note taking and journaling are closely related. But like from a you know, trying to introspect, I would say that I don't have a good practice of doing that, and I probably should.
One of the things that attracted me to your guys' content so much was that you were interviewing all these people, but you were also pursuing improvement within yourselves. And 75 Hard was the thing that I was like, oh my God, I just did this too. It transformed my life. I'm curious what type of effect it had for you guys, since it's been some time since you completed it.
Yeah, I would say if anyone's interested in hearing more about our journey, you could go listen to our episode 75 Hard with our buddy Striker. Yeah, I mean, it was very transformative for me. I would say, like, you know, Lewis is sort of like a robot. We like to joke, and like, he's really good about that sort of thing. But for me, it was huge. I lost 50 pounds. I got into, you know, a completely different state of mind throughout the process. I learned a ton about myself, and then phase one was another really good experience, especially like the power list and being able to like have a direct, as Lewis likes to say, like a bar for winning the day. And I think that those two things were really great. But overall, I mean, you can't even really put into words the effect that it had on the course of my life, probably.
What about you, Lewis?
Yeah, I'll jump in on say the term I like to call it is a minimum success criteria. I think it's huge for any interval of life. So like at the beginning of every semester, what is the bare minimum that has to happen this semester to consider it a productive semester? And then on the days I'm feeling extra jazzed and super energized, what is the extra stuff I'm going to do? But if I have on my bad days, it's like I can give myself permission to not do those things. And I think the 75 Hard and Andy Frisell in general really helped me learn that. So on the 75 Hard, if you do those 6 habits and nothing else, you can chalk up the day as a victory. And then, you know, when the challenge is over, you can develop your own version of that, which is just, you know, maybe writing out your own list of 5 things. And then you keep tally. So like my goal for this year is to, you always got to do it the night before to keep yourself accountable. But write out your list of things you're going to do the following day, usually just 5. And then if you do all 5, right, you chalk up the day as a win. So my goal is to like keep that over 300 for the year. So not like every, and not like I even do it on a vacation, and then I make it things like that would help me more enjoy the vacation fully. So it's like have my phone off during every meal is like one of the things I would put on the list, because that ensures that like what my priorities are that day, I'm living in tune with them. And then sometimes I'll put like an easy thing there on like, so when I didn't have my computer, I was like out of town running a marathon or something. I still wanted to like keep the list going because I wanted to, it was the first time I was doing it, and I wanted to like not break a 100-day streak. And I literally just did it like, what can I do in a car? It was like I could add 25 random people on LinkedIn. And like that's kind of turned into like some really random serendipity. So I did that like every day that week I was on that vacation. And like that led to a lot of really cool connections. And so I still did something important, even though it's tiny, and it like kept the habit alive. So I think those are the big things. And then another really big difference for me for 75 Hard, this is a really generic thing a lot of people in 2020 are saying, but value of the outdoors forces you to get outside every day. That was amazing. I spent a lot of time indoors in my life, and being forced to go outside, absolutely awesome. The other big thing is just the difference between like, there's just a switch, and I'm having a hard time finding the right words for it, but being like you're doing something versus like you are absolutely sure you're doing something. Like because the consequences of failure in 75 Hard are starting back at like day 0, and you're so sure you're not doing that, there's no question in your mind if like you're doing everything that day. You're like, there's no maybe I'm doing it. It's like you're fully committed to it. And so whenever I'm trying to like take on some new habit, or like, okay, let's do Wim Hof breathing, right? Let's get into like this whole cold thing. And there's a difference between reading his book, being inspired, and being motivated to like do it, and then like tapering off after 3 weeks versus like how could I structure an accountability program with the same level of seriousness as I had about 75 hard to ensure that no matter what, I still get this in. It's like that's a really, really helpful like tool in my toolbox of like achievement to like be able to know, okay, do I have the same level of accountability and commitment to whatever this thing is I'm serious about doing that I did with 75 hard? If not, there's a chance I'm going to fail because I'm not fully taking it seriously enough.
What inspired you guys to do this? I mean, you guys are in college, you could do a million other things. Why did you decide to do 75 hard?
Well, I definitely coaxed Kyle into doing it. So his answer is peer pressure. Maybe, and like the appeal of the weight loss, because obviously he lost lots of weight and it worked. So I think it's actually another good story there. But what I first found it, so I troll, like, despite doing a year of podcasting and interviewing 60 entrepreneurs, I still sometimes go on the internet as if I'm back at square one. And I'm like, how to make money online, right? Just like, let's just search Google and see if they can answer my question, as if I haven't spent a year thinking about more sophisticated answers. And one website I really enjoy is the Fastlane forum by MJ DeMarco, the author of Unscripted and The Millionaire Fastlane. And it's just like this huge sub thread on his website is like, everyone on that thread does 75 hard, and they weren't a badass and they did it and they're a badass. So it kind of always been, I know you had Joel Runyon on this podcast, like in the early 30s or something. I listened to that episode while in Vegas. It was a great one. But I've been using his Impossible List for like 3 years as like just how I manage my personal goal setting. And I, at one point, just in my freshman year of college or something, saw 75 hard on this forum, always put it on the list as something to do one day. And then kind of like quarantine, everything else, I was like, well, I have like the stars are aligned in the sense that I have nothing to do for at least 100 days. So let's just cross this one off.
Yeah, Kyle, is that correct? Peer pressure was the main reason?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that he was insane for committing to it. I was like, what are you doing? Like, I don't understand this at all. But then I hooked up him and my buddy Stryker. Like, we went on a Zoom call, and I told Lewis to tell Stryker what he was doing, and Lewis was
like
telling
in
him
life.
about it.
It was like it was like, what, like, tell me about your life.
Yeah, and he told him about 75 hard, and then immediately upon Lewis finishing speaking, Stryker goes, "I'll do it if Kyle does it," and I'm like, I don't. I distinctly remember my face just turning bright red and being like, I'm going to have to do this now. And the last time that I felt that was the last time that I lost 50 pounds, actually. I've done it twice in my life. And it was when, so this is the story that Lewis was telling you, the saying that I had. When I was in the 8th grade, I like filled out an interest form for cross country. And, we were in lunch, and it was time to walk into the cross country meeting. And I was like, nah, I'm not going to do it. Like, I don't want to commit to that. And my buddy, John Lewis, shout out JL, he was like, yeah, you're not going to do it because you're too fat. And so I turned bright red in the same way that I felt. It was like the same feeling for the second time. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And I guess the rest is history in terms of both cross country and 75 hard.
What did that feel like when your buddy turned to you and said, you're not going to do it because you're fat?
Yeah, I mean, he's, one of my best friends. So it was, and we had that sort of relationship. So it wasn't like my feelings were hurt, but literally physically, like, you can feel your face heat up, and like, at least for me, and like, your blood is boiling, like you turn red because you know that what someone's saying is true. You know that it's like a good sign that like someone's speaking truth to you, and you should probably listen, but it's definitely not easy.
Yeah. And that goes to accountability, because JL was using accountability in some respect of being
Right.
like keeping you accountable. And you've since used that with me, in the sense of you came up to me basically at the start of the year or a little bit before the start of the year, and you said, I want to track my workouts and I want to use you as an accountability partner. And my question to you is, why did you decide to do that?
Well, I've done it before with somebody that I spoke about, Buddy Dillenberg. He's a huge mentor for me and role model. But he's really fit, and I did that with him last year, and I was actually doing it before 75 hard, so it gave me like a good base to start 75 hard with. And it's just extremely effective for me for some reason. Like knowing that I committed to somebody and I said I'm going to work out this many times for this long. It's just, I don't know what it is about me. I'm just incapable. Well, I'm capable, but it seems like I'm incapable of failing just because like I'm very committed to the idea of not letting that person down. And one thing that's important is the relationship that you are, I guess, like staking as collateral on your decision to work out a lot. And I value my relationship with Buddy, and I value my relationship with you. So I figured that you were a good person to do this accountability partnership with.
Yeah,
It
never
never
really
be high enough for you to care.
Right.
Yeah, I never thought about that like that. But Lewis, what about you? Have you used accountability in any way that stands out?
I'm sure I have.
You $5 waking up, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I've done a lot. I do I think a lot in terms of intervals. So I've done it a lot on like the scale of the day. A lot of these I guess I haven't tried to introduce any sufficiently challenging habits recently enough, or I've just done so many of these challenge after the other that I've achieved like ultimately like the goal. And like, this is something I've learned from the Fountainhead, which is like an Ayn Rand book that I really like, is your ultimate goal should be like, when you're 50 and there's nothing wrong at all, literally nothing wrong at all with using an accountability partner. It's extremely effective. And this might just be like a worthless aspiration to have, but I think part of being like a fully integrated human and part of 75 hard is like to keep yourself accountable. And back in the day, for sure, like I would set up things with Kyle. I have an accountability thing right now, actually. Let's just scratch all that. I told my buddy, I sent him $69 that I would do a jiu-jitsu class with him this semester, and I haven't done that yet. So
What do you think's holding you back
from what?
from going to the jiu-jitsu class?
Straight up poor time management, to like just lots on my plate and just haven't squeezed it in.
And just
No
the
fear.
fact that you can still do it at any point,
It's just not been like it's simply a matter of prioritization.
And how do you come
And
up
like
with this?
contentness with like my other fitness systems. I'm not like in need of like a fitness revitalization. I'm super into calisthenics right now, so like I don't really need to introduce more chaos into my life.
And you guys are also into X3, right? What is this X3 about?
Oh God, the X3. I haven't made enough games with it to definitively say whether or not it's nonsense. But the X3, I mean, I like it for sure.
Yeah, come on,
But,
Lewis.
like,
Don't be
I
afraid to endorse something that you
I just-
enjoy.
Want to have gone like follow the program for 12 weeks, compare my body scan results on week 12 to my body scan results on week 1, and be like, this definitively made muscle gains, versus just being like, I had fun when I used this and I look the exact same at the end of week 12. Like, I'm not here to promote things that had a placebo effect. I'm just too early for it. Like, I have been doing the carnivore
It's
diet.
sick. I don't care what he says. Look, it's sick.
I'm making a good point here, but
okay, keep going.
basically it's something that I've struggled with a lot in the past that I think is something I've like really learned recently, is because I try new shit all the time, right? Like I'm 7 days into 75 hard. Kyle, you have to do it with me, right? I'm 7 days in. I haven't even finished it. It could be bullshit. It could be a waste of both of our times. And like I do that a lot. It's like Wim Hof breathing. Kyle, you got to do it with me. And then it's like I quit 10 days in. He quits 10 days in. I wasted both of our time. And I was reading the Carnivore Code, which is like another new bullshit thing I'm about to fully devote myself to, like a brand new dramatic way of living. I'm going to swap out every way of being to accommodate all of a sudden. And the book's like, try doing this for 90 days before telling anyone they need to do it with you. And it's like, maybe never tell anyone. It's like such a simple idea. It's like, if you actually follow it correctly and it actually works for you and like you have pronounced benefits from it, people will come to you to want to learn more about it. So that's why I'm just like hesitant to promote the X3. But that being said, the X3 is totally awesome.
It is
a resistance band weightlifting system at home. It leverages the principle of variable resistance. which if you think about the two words in a literal context, it tells you exactly what it is. So throughout the range of
Basically,
motion,
the
the feet
idea,
gets more
yeah.
difficult to lift. Kyle wants, yeah. Are you
Basically,
going
the
for
idea
it? Go
is
for
that
it.
through different ranges of motion, you can push different uh, amounts of force. And so you can only bench press as much as you can move in your weakest range of motion.
Which is
And
right off
thus,
your chest,
you're
obviously.
leaving a lot on the table in those other ranges of motion. And this is the solution to that, where the variable or where the resistance it varies, changes through the movement, so that in your weakest ranges of motion you're moving relatively less weight, and in your strongest ranges of motion you are moving more weight,
Dramatically more.
dramatically more. And yeah, we've been doing it for a few weeks now together, and yeah, in terms of like I am huge now. That's just not true, but I do enjoy it, and I think that it's really awesome. Specifically, being able to deadlift in your bedroom is huge. It's really cool.
Well, I think that it's so important for any type of fitness to find things that you enjoy doing. And it sounds like that's the case for you, at least, Kyle. I don't know about you, Lewis. We'll have to see if the body scan results are conclusive. But, back to Lewis and that idea of, you start something and you want to tell everyone about it. Like, where do you think that comes from?
I think it's just like genuine excitement and curiosity and being like a happy, high energy person and just like wanting to share something cool. It's like, I make a good steak, right? Like a really good steak. And I'm like, y'all got to come here and try this, right? Like tell my roommates, like, I'll literally cut up a slice, like give them a little sampling plate, clean fork, and be like, have some of this. I think that's just like a very intrinsic human desire to share things we think will improve other people's life, either in like a just this moment, you'll enjoy eating this fantastic ribeye I just prepared, or in like the scale of like, you just see that, like if Kyle was out of shape and I'm like, hey, I'm doing this thing and I think it'll get you in shape and you'd be happy if you're in shape because I'm in shape and I love being in shape. And like, it's kind of just that and like wanting to share. But people take you less and less seriously in proportion to how often you recommend things you don't personally stick with.
Like the boy who cried wolf,
Yeah. Or the boy who celebrated wolf. And then like the wolf ended up being like a sham, he's like hyping up the wolf and then the wolf like shows up and he's like tiny. I don't know. Point being,
Yeah.
I used to just don't want to be a hype man. I don't want to overhype things that I haven't fully determined are worth the hype.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lewis, one thing I want to talk to you about was the note card system you created.
Yeah.
I don't know if you created it or you found it somewhere, but how did you get the idea to do this?
So everything's always a combination of multiple influences. Like I think the word for that is eclectic. Just like drawing inspiration from multiple sources. One thing I did during the 75 hard, not to make this whole thing about that, I promise that was interesting in some respects before the challenge, was trying to make it as simple as possible to keep track of the 6 things. So I made like a note card with columns, rows and columns for like, 7 days, 6 things, check it off, and then every week make a fresh one. And then around the same time, so like I just was carrying that card around with me and I liked the simplicity of it. Then around the same time I was coming up on the end of the challenge, I was like frantically thinking, I don't want to keep doing this challenge forever, but what do I want to keep from it? And how do I restructure my life to keep all the good without like the inconvenient stuff? Because I personally don't think you have to exercise 90 minutes a day. Like I just want to do 10-minute X3 workouts that use science and other fancy nonsense, and I don't need the other 80 minutes. But then the other side of it is just like reading books like The Miracle Morning and like being into the whole world of like affirmations, and then like reading books like The Daily Stoic and being into the whole idea of like frequently reminding yourself wisdom. And then Readwise, shout out Tristan Homsey and Dan, the other guy from Readwise. If you're familiar with that app, it like synchronizes all of your highlights from books into one central platform. And so I had the habit for like 2 years of just going in that every day and reviewing 10 of my highlights from books I was reading. But the problem with that system is you're submitting some autonomy to whatever algorithm decides what surfaces. And those were also lessons in, not my own words, they were lessons in just the quote of the book. So it doesn't resonate the same way as something that you'd written yourself. And then, when Rome was becoming a thing, I was super, super into Rome. And like, I read every book that Kano said you had to read. So I read How to Take Smart Notes by Sankey Ahrens. Like I wrote a whole paper about it. And that book really, really, really emphasized the importance of writing things down in your own words. So I started to do that. So this was basically a way to emulate the daily review cadence of Readwise, but be able to control what surfaces and do it in my own words. So now it's just like a system for those on YouTube of just like note cards of this is funny. This is one from that Dickie tweeted. Does this make the boat go faster? So it's just like an idea that I want to revisit on a periodic basis. And if it writes down and it resonates, and like also if I'm ever needing to write and like I'm short on ideas, there's like surely something in here. Then I can also structure it where there's like, you know, the ones I want to review every day are just like this separate one, and then the ones I want to have like some degree of randomness, just like take a little bit off the top, choose like, all right, this much today. So I get to see everything I want to see within the course of a week. So it's a really powerful system for reminding myself of any idea I think is interesting or worth being reminded of.
Do any of them contradict each other?
Probably.
Yeah. Any
Yes.
come to mind off the top of your head?
Yes. So I have one in there that says, it's hilarious. Shout out single women out there listening to the Danny Miranda podcast. I have one that's like, don't use dating apps. And then it says like, then I like had a period where I was staying home all the time. And I was like, well, nothing's going to happen if I don't use dating apps. So then I wrote like after COVID, like in parentheses. And then I like met a girl in real life. And like, that was a thing for a few months. So I was like, yeah, the dating app thing, that's stupid again. Then like that fizzled. So then I was like, hopeless again. And then I like read like some Cal Newport that was like dating apps are terrible. And then I wrote an atomic essay about how awful they are. It's like that what I'm periodically destroying, making qualifications for, rewriting. Because then there's a lot of them in there about like the whole ethos of digital minimalism. That's like, you know, the best things in life are, or there's this line from the Almanac of Naval Ravikant that's like, no exceptions, less screens, more happiness. So I like see that and I'm like, no dating apps. And then another one is like, you've been single too long, like chill with the stupid rules, use a dating app. So that's like a pretty, there's some contradictions for that one for sure.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the honesty and forthrightness. Kyle, do you use any of these note card systems?
Yeah, I tried it for a little while. I just found like myself not reviewing them, you know?
Yeah.
So no, I don't.
And
I think that there are a bunch of ideas worth revisiting. And I probably should, just like journaling, have a more scheduled routine of revisiting different ideas. But I don't know. Just no, I don't.
Yeah, I don't either, but it sounds interesting. And it only works, right, if you can stick to it and it's enjoyable for you to stick to.
Yeah,
Like
I
we
think
were
that's an
saying
important thing, is just like Lewis is saying, having it in your own words, but also having it be your system makes it much more likely that you follow it and that it's successful for you. And I think that applies broadly.
Yeah, so along the same lines of what I was asking Lewis, which was about what he's changed his mind on, or what two note cards disagree with each other. What have you changed your mind on in the past 6 months or the past year?
Well, a year ago I was pretty vegan, so now I'm a carnivore. So that's one for the record books. That one, like, I'm trying to think if there is anything.
This is a question that I love to ask, but it's so hard to answer.
Yeah, one thing. This is like my go-to, and I've articulated this in a couple of different blog posts. But just the like approachability of entrepreneurs. I think like the value of the podcasts that like the three of us work on creating is demystifying. This is not something that like I believe strongly. It was just like an unproductive like belief formed by like being naive and like not being exposed to like the actual reality. But the media just presents entrepreneurship in such like an unproductive way, where anytime an entrepreneur is successful, it's because they had a brilliant idea, because they were a genius, because they set out from the starting line, exactly knew what the end product would look like, because they, you know, I'm all for visualization and affirmations and all that stuff, but like it's hardly ever people like they visualize the outcome, but they're perfectly ready to like accept the pivots along the way that got them there. And I think I kind of just had those unquestioned assumptions. It's like, yep, successful people, like because of habits out of reach, because of traits out of reach, because of like knowledge I don't have. And now like through the process and like understanding people and speaking with so many of these people myself, and like actually being able to relate to them and see them as humans has like increased my belief in some level of deterministic success, like not relying on external factors like how you're born or being like lucky or things like that.
What about you, Kyle?
Yeah, of course, I've been thinking about an answer, and this is just something I want to say. I don't know if it's necessarily. I think it's something that's self-evident once you hear it, but it's something that I, personally, have struggled with, and it comes back to the constant imperfect action, and that's such a good like way to encapsulate what I'm saying. But like, just for a long time, I was like, I guess paralyzed, or like what's the word for it? Analysis by paralysis. Just like with everything, it's like, I could send this message, I could send this DM, but maybe if maybe I need to know a little bit more about decentralized finance before I send this message, or maybe maybe if I wait a week, like maybe that's when it'll be the right time. And it's just like always optimizing for right now. And I think that one thing that like fits nicely into this is the idea that relationships are like a muscle. And so basically, like, you shouldn't not communicate with people because you think that they're busy or whatever. Like, relationships are like a muscle, and you have to use them or they'll atrophy. You have to be in contact with people, and it comes back to the idea of constantly imperfect action, because your messages will always have typos. You'll always leave things on the table. You're always risking sounding dumb, and maybe you are, but I think that always sending the message, no matter what next week might look like, is something that maybe like it's self-evident and makes sense, but it's something that I want to remind myself all the time, and it's something that has recently entered into my way of being.
Yeah.
How did you get better at that?
I mean, just like hitting the send button, and like hitting the tweet button, or like
I think one part of it is urgency. And like maybe I stress Kyle out. I'm like, Kyle, we have to, this guy canceled and we have to publish an interview 8 days from now. And so that, he's like, well, I got to send the messages. Like, who cares if they're good? Like, we got to find someone. It's like, you don't have the time to overthink because you just have to. Like, so like legitimate scarcity.
Definitely urgency is one thing that helps. But really, I mean, it just comes down to the moment of, deciding that you're going to send the message,
Yeah,
or
this is
whatever
never,
it might be.
it's never been an issue for me, so it fascinates me. What do you think is holding you back from sending you the message?
Yeah, I think it's basically like the scarcity mindset sort of thing that we talked about with K High on one of our most recent episodes. It's just like the idea that people are experts, and they don't want to communicate with me because they've got more important things to do, and like more important people to talk to, and I don't know enough about this to hold a good conversation with them, so I need to learn enough about who they are and about their topic before I before it's appropriate that I reach out to them. It's like, well, I haven't looked at it's like I don't understand the fundamentals of how their business works, so I shouldn't be reaching out to them in order to record a podcast. And it's like the opposite. Like, you need to create the urgency of an interview that's going to happen in order to give you the incentive to research and find out about the fundamentals of their business model, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lewis, has that been an issue for you at all, or is that something that has been easier?
I'd say 98% of the time, no issue whatsoever. So like I said, an hour ago about like, it wasn't an hour ago, poor sense of time, but it's like, if you asked me to interview Mark Cuban, I'm like, I'm not confident I could make that happen, but someone at that level. So I could probably like reach out to, every billionaire, and one of them would say yes. Right. And so for me, like when we started the podcast, there are very specific people in mind. Like before we started recording, we were talking about The Third Door by Alex Benayan. And like, I don't fear hearing no from a person who like I haven't been emotionally committed to getting on the podcast since day one. So it's like, someone tells me to read a book, I'm like, it's a good book, I'll read it. and I'll send the author a message like no hesitation next day after finishing the book. But if it's like there's no fear, it's kind of like there's no buildup, so there's no fear. But for like two people specifically, I know you're smiling because you want me to say it. But for Nat Eliason and for Alex Benayan, like people that just have been on the day one list, where I'm like, if they say no, that's like some weird emotional connection of like we started the podcast for people like them to say yes. That there's a hesitancy and like a don't want, like you fear the no from that specific person, but not from like, I don't know, maybe it's irrational, but
that's your 10 out of 10. It's not irrational. Like that in your mind, like that's a girl who's a 10 is what I'm saying. That's the connection I'm making in this ecosystem. Yeah. That's what
you're a 10, dude.
Yeah, 10, exactly.
The wise Nat Eliason.
Yeah, no, but I understand it. But how do you get around that? Like, what are you gonna do about it? Delay it forever?
Kind of like, I think if I had to describe the strategy, it would be to defer asking until there's no way they'd say no. Is like, that's just a very difficult place to reach for these people. But, you know, we've had like, if we've had their best friend, their wife, their, like, you know, it's like, if we're at a point where it's like clearly value add in their favor, like, it's like if we're getting 1 million downloads, which we're not, but like if we ever got to that point, they're not going to say no because that's like a clear value add to them. So I guess that's like the way I've deferred it is like waiting for the show growth to catch up to like it being stupid. Like no one says no to Joe Rogan, right? Because like the boost to their career is too worthwhile for them to say no. So like if we were clearly like, if every episode meant an author got 10,000 extra books purchased, then I'm gonna reach out to like any author with serious confidence.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting. And so you plan on not reaching out to those two people for a long, long time? Like I'm salivating at the idea of listening to either one of them on your podcast.
Oh, now the listeners are demanding it. So maybe. And maybe also, here's another really good excuse. Holding out for maybe, you know, holding out till Kyle and I get our in-person interview infrastructure in place and save it for the day where we can fly to Austin and hang out with Nat, or save it for the day where we can, I don't know where Alex lives, Los Angeles, and hang out with Alex for the day and do the podcast. So we're going to hold out for that too.
Yeah.
That's the full experience.
Okay. I'll let that one slide.
Excuse for sure.
Yeah. But finally, I want to talk about, you know, you guys are doing something in college, starting this podcast, improving yourselves, putting yourselves out there. Something that I'd never considered doing. And I think you guys know a lot more than the average college kid. So what's something you would like the average college student to know and tell the rest of the world? And I'd love to just get your perspective on that.
I have so much to say here. So maybe I'll just ramble. And then when I've hit my acceptable amount of time, you just switch over.
Well, I don't have much to say. You know, I don't think that I am better than any average college student. I think that like there are, you know, trade-offs, and it's like being an average college student has its own merits. And like, I think that, you know, adding a bunch of stuff on top, like I consider all the time, like if I only focused on school for the entire 4 years of school, like would the value that I got out of that be marginally higher than doing a podcast and doing all these things? So it's like, you know, everybody is different, but I think that one piece of advice that I would give to college students is just the idea of, it's like Elliot Bisnow. He's like a really big character in The Third Door, but he did this interview with Craig Clemens where he described how he was on a college campus and everybody was walking in one direction. Everybody was going to class at the Great Hall or whatever. And he just had this moment where he was like,
I'm a zombie.
And then he turned around and walked the other direction. And it's like, you know, I would just encourage everybody to look left, to consider the alternative. And that's pretty much my big piece of advice.
I love it. Lewis?
Mine's just kind of a message of optimism, and like it's so chill to like it's just so socially acceptable to have negative views of like the entire world. It's like, why does this matter? The planet's gonna die. Like, why should I care? Like, all capitalism is evil. Just like these broad beliefs that like holding them makes you live your life in a worse way. And just like people don't recognize, college students especially, like people don't spend enough time thinking about how incredible the modern world is. And I think college students especially, like the university system, the mainstream media, like all of our sources of input just want to tell us how terrible XYZ things are and don't want to remind us of like all the things that are amazing. Like there's a ton of like basic examples, right? Like declining infant mortality, but it's just the things that are possible for any person. I called it like the amount of friction required to manifest any idea is virtually zero. So like if you want to learn anything, right? Like there's an amazing resource to learn that thing. Literally, if you like have an idea in your head, like you could have someone 3D print your exact vision of an object instantly. And like this applies to every single field. Like if you want to be an artist, you can like even just this like very, very, very this like little reductionist way of thinking, but basic things like a compute. If you like drawing, right? Like your computer is an infinite canvas. Like you can get a stylus and like draw on it infinity. Like it doesn't matter what your creative interests are, but like anything is possible in this day and age. And people are just focused on like what's wrong with the world, and that doesn't necessarily make you a happier person. Then the other thing is not like to think about death, but think about death a little bit. That's cool. But this is something that we think about a lot. It's just people don't take their life seriously enough. Like, you know, just the finitude of your life, it's going to end, and like you only get one shot. That's all we know for sure, at least, is what we're here. So it's like, don't just kind of laugh off life. Just like make plans to pursue your highest version, right? And like think about it. Don't just laugh. Kyle and I really get into some kids when they like self-deprecate and like celebrate their weaknesses as if it's funny to have those weaknesses. And like that's not ideal. Like Kyle has a better like counter argument to that than I do. But don't celebrate like, oh, I'm so bad at math. Ha 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 ha. Like stop doing that would be like my other piece of advice.
I love it, but I'm also curious, what's the counter argument, Kyle?
I have no idea what he's talking about.
No, it's not counter argument. He explains just a better explanation, like what to do instead. Not the counter arguments, but
I mean,
saying, I'm so bad
this is another piece of advice that I think is good, and that is to have a direction. Like when somebody asks you about yourself, to always be able to articulate directly and clearly sort of like the direction in which you're going, and never say that you don't know. You're like, you know, I'm just like a lost bird. Well, it's like I just think that, you know, if you open yourself to a ton of serendipity when you're able to communicate directly what it is that you are both interested in and think that you're going to do in the future, even if that isn't true, because it shortens the feedback loops to like closed doors. So like you know, I'm super interested in real estate. Like I'm just going to tell everybody that asks me the question of what I'm interested in that it's real estate. And, you know, they're like, oh, well, you should talk to Bob and John and Jim, because all of them are like
10,000 apartment units.
Exactly. So it's just like, you know, you open yourself up to a lot of serendipity by being able to directly communicate what you actually are interested in. And I would encourage people to, you know, to make it up. Like whatever it might be, because otherwise you're closing yourself off to a lot of interesting opportunities.
And you can even say with confidence, I'm going on a journey of self-discovery. Maybe like not that foo-foo sounding, but like,
yeah,
I'm taking the next 6 months to explore all of these things I'm interested in. Some of those are XYZ. Some of the things I might be interested in are
this life coach, Jim, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or you got to read the book. Like
right,
this book
exactly.
will help you find, you know.
Well,
this is not laughing about your weaknesses.
Yeah, I'm totally on the same page with you guys about that. Let's stay on the topic of finding your path. What advice would you give to someone who's completely lost? Other than just pick something.
Well, I think one thing I'd say we changed our minds about is the idea of discovering your niche over time. So not just like every online creator is like, you got to have your niche and act as if you're going to, on day one, know exactly what you're going to be fired up to talk about for the next 10 years. Just basically expecting there to never be the answer on day zero of what your passion is. So like it's in the process of trying things that you decide what resonates. Like,
Yeah,
you just can't know. Then you commit like you did, Danny, right? To like, I'm going to do this. You didn't know that you're going to love podcasting, right? And I don't know that I'm going to love or hate jujitsu when I go and do it. But like when you say something like that, you just try a lot of stuff, and then you have to set up a minimum commitment to have given it a fair shot.
Yeah, we recorded a podcast with Jeff Woods, who runs the company that is derived from the book The One Thing. And, basically I told him that I want to be in real estate. I want to buy apartment complexes. And he was like, just like, I know that that's going to change. Like, it's like, you're too young, but it's good that you have an idea and a direction. And like, I don't want to give advice to people that are, quote unquote lost, because I don't think that I don't know that I'm found or anything. I think it's like that idea of constant imperfect action, coming back to it constantly and just being willing to put yourself out there. I think like there's a lot of loneliness. And I think that is a root of a lot of problems in terms of being lost, and that just like finding people to have fun with. And that's really powerful in terms of, putting you on a direction, and on that vector, you will find things that interest you.
So you bring up loneliness. How do we solve loneliness?
Well, being around other people, dating apps, right? It's a hard question, dude. I think it's a really, really big problem. And I think that it's only accelerated by social media and COVID and quarantine and all these different, negative factors. But, I don't want to harp on it. It's just, I think that it's a personal choice too. And it's like, deciding that you're going to go out and find people.
Lewis, any thoughts on solving loneliness? A huge international epidemic.
Right?
Yeah, let's solve it right here.
Solve it right here.
Totally.
Well, I think there's an easy solution. No. I think that with loneliness, like there's so many types of loneliness. It's like, are you someone who's literally afraid to talk to a stranger, or like you've never introduced yourself to anyone ever, or it's like you say no to social invitations just because you like would prefer to stay home and like do nothing. There's like whole varied places on that spectrum. I think one thing, everyone has some degree, like there's this Navalism that's like, read what you love to read until you love to read. So like you start out reading basic shitty pop nonfiction, or like you read about vampires because you're interested in vampires. And eventually you get bored because all your books are about vampires. And then you like actually want to engage with something more interesting and substantive. So I think you could apply that same like frame of thinking to socialization. It's like you find a group of common interest on the internet for that thing. It's like I'm sure like you're not even talking about like, it's not about making friends. It's just about like finding those other 10,000 people on like a pocket of the internet who care about zombies. Then you like go to the zombie fanatic meetup, and like you just talk about zombies with people from that, and like you get on the community calls, and like all of a sudden you learn how to make friends. I don't know if like that progression made sense, but you start like everyone has some intellectual curiosity about something. It could be like, a lot of kids, like Jewish fraternity guys, like they all love the NBA. I don't get it. They all just love the NBA. Like if you're a Jewish fraternity guy, just like go onto the Facebook group for like the people, chat about it, and like eventually have a phone call with someone, eventually meet someone in real life. And like you'll learn interpersonal skills. Just get involved in stuff. There's a lot of books about like developing a leisure life and just joining existing communities. People feel this pressure to build everything from scratch in their lives when it's just easier to plug into things that already exist. So like CrossFit, that. Just like start doing CrossFit. That'll like solve all your loneliness probably. Mm-hmm. Might break your joints, but like just start doing CrossFit. Or I don't even do CrossFit.
I think it's a really good point, and I want to add to it just about the importance of looking at your consumption behavior. Like I certainly didn't spend any time listening to myself or listening to what I was paying attention to on a daily basis. If I did, I would have said, wow, you spend a lot of time listening and watching podcasts. Maybe there's something there, but it's like finding that and finding those things, looking at your past purchases on Amazon, look at the random stuff you consume is how I think about it. And I love those two answers, guys. All right. So this has been a lot of fun. This has been a great time. And where can people find more from you guys?
I think the recommended place to go, since you're already on somewhere listening to a podcast, the best place to find us would be our podcast, The Lewis and Kyle Show. Hopefully Daniel will have our name spelled correctly in this description. So just look it up there.
It's Louis.
Yep. So we should put Kyle's name first, maybe, because of easier to spell, more ubiquitous. But we're
LewisandKyle.com, the Lewis and Kyle Show on all your podcast players, on YouTube. We're everywhere. Just hit the Google. We'll show up on Twitter.
Might be on
I'm
Tinder,
_ Kyle Bishop. Lewis is Shulman Lewis or Lewis Shulman, one of the two. You'll find us. Danny, we greatly appreciate it. We're big fans of you, big fans of what you're building, and I can't wait to have a front row seat to the big stadium in-person interview with Gary Vee one day.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you guys on as part of the first 100, and I'm excited to see how this journey unfolds for both of us. Thank you for coming on, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Danny.